Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Friday, March 29th slate for college basketball DFS on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. It is the second day of the Sweet 16 of the 2024 NCAA Tournament, and I got to say, this Thursday slate is not starting off so hot for us. The bracket is looking like garbage. The DFS lineups for Thursday night are looking like garbage. Played way too much Caleb Love, and I should have known better because, Caleb Love is prone to have games like this. But anyway, I've got a lot of guys going in the late night session. Did have a lot of Chase Hunters, so maybe can we redeem ourselves before the end of this Thursday night slate is over and look to Friday with a little bit more confidence. Either way, here in this episode, we're going to give you confidence that you can build winning DFS lineups for the Friday night slate. We're going to break down all 4 games and go over who you do and do not want to be targeting for your DraftKings and FanDuel lineups here for this second day of the Sweet 16. Now, a little bit of a show schedule announcement. I may or may not be doing a live session for the Elite 8 games. We are trying something new with my daughter sleeping at night, and so it's a little bit more touch and go. So I don't exactly know if I'm going to be able to sit down and do a live, full on continuous. Whereas if I record it, I can start, stop, resume anytime I need to. So if you want to be there for the live session, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so that way you can know when that happens, if it does in fact happen. And make sure you're following me on Twitter as well, because I will tweet out when or if we do end up going live for the Saturday and Sunday Elite 8 slates. But if not, you'll see them uploaded just like they normally are. There won't be any changes for that. If we don't go live, you're still going to get the Elite 8 episodes. Just letting you guys know that it may or may not be live. So stay posted for updates on that, depending on what I end up doing. Other than that, that's going to pretty much do it for the intro, guys. Make sure, if you have not already, please hit the like button for the video. It really does help me out a ton. I really do appreciate it. It helps the podcast show up in searches, and it really helps out more than you could ever know. And then if you have not already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We are closing in on 500 subscribers on YouTube, and the only way we can get there is if people like you hit that subscribe button, and I really do appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and end the introduction there and start talking about game number 1, NC State versus Marquette. So looking at it, this is a slate with all different types of game environments. Looking at the 4 games, we've got 2 games that are up in the 150s for the total, 1 that's in the 130s for the total, and then 1 that is just barely in the 140s. But we do have a lot of teams here in this slate where we know who is going to be playing the minutes. We know who is going to be taking the shots, and it's just going to be a matter of putting the puzzle pieces together for these DFS lineups and figuring out who the right value plays are, because much like the Thursday night slate, there is not a whole lot of obvious cheap value plays. It's just going to be fairly difficult to construct a lineup because there's so many great options at the top and there's so little great options at the bottom. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into game number 1, NC State taking on Marquette. And I guess you could call NC State the Cinderella of this tournament, being an 11 seed who stole a bid conference tournament weekend and is here sitting in the Sweet 16. So they're going to be kind of like the public team that everybody loves for the next few days, right? Well, anyway, this game is projected to be 78-72 in favor of Marquette, according to KenPom. That 150-point total is the second highest of the slate, according to KenPom. Now, on the NC State side, the good news is for them is that Marquette gives up a ton of fantasy points. And how is that exactly considered? Marquette's a pretty good defense. Well, they play at a fast tempo, and they give up a ton of offensive rebounds. They give up a ton of assists, and they give up a ton of threes. Marquette does not foul very much at all, which lends itself to less physical play, shall you say. And so they're not really contesting as many shots as tough as a lot of teams who foul more. It's just a simple fact of the matter. So there's a lot of fantasy points that are going to be going around for this NC State team. However, it's really hard to read too much into NC State's game against Oakland and the box score from that game, because Oakland played a ton of zone in that game, which you're not going to see any from Marquette in this game. I don't think that's not what Shaka Smart does. And so it's really hard to just go by that game and just pencil in the guys that did well in the Oakland game into doing well here in this Marquette game. Now, the good news is in that Oakland game is that all 5 starters from O'Connell, Horn, Morcell, Diarra, and Burns, all 5 of them ended up in double figures in that game against Oakland. DJ Burns was the one who led them in usage in that game. He ended up with 46 fantasy points, 9 for 12 from the field, double-double, 24 and 11. So what's interesting with DJ Burns is he's a guy whose endurance isn't all that great. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. He played 42 minutes against Oakland which is a really good sign that he does have endurance to play a lot of minutes. And if he's able to stay on the floor, he should eat against Marquette. I don't think Marquette has a natural matchup to go against him. He's going to have a massive weight advantage on Oso Ighodaro and a length and weight advantage on David Joplin. I don't know how they're going to guard him. But the problem is with DJ Burns is that to stay on the floor, he's going to have to be able to guard somebody on the defensive end. And that has been the problem with him when you look back at the historically over the course of the season. He hasn't played a lot of minutes in some games where they just couldn't find a matchup for him or they couldn't hide him defensively. And I think Marquette might be that scenario. So you're looking at a situation for DJ Burns where he's got a ton of upside because I think he's going to have a great matchup on the offensive end, but can he play enough minutes to take advantage of that matchup by being on the floor for his defense? So I could see DJ Burns going either way. I think he is a great GPP play for either reason because he's either going to help you come in first or last. Now, DJ Horn is, in my opinion, NC State's best player. He was quiet in that game against Oakland, was 4 for 11 from the field, only put up 23 fantasy points. The zone just wasn't for him. He's really a good isolation scorer where he can go one-on-one without there being help at the rim and get to the rim that way. He also takes a lot of threes. And, the zone just didn't really help him get in a rhythm or do anything in that way. So sitting here at $7,000, I think that's a very affordable price tag for him. He's hit 5x value in one of his last 3 games when he had 36 against Carolina. So he's got a massive ceiling, and I think he's a guy that could really give you a good fantasy performance here in this game. Now, Mohamed Diarra is really interesting. He's had 39 fantasy points in 3 straight games, but his usage rate is like supremely low. He doesn't take a lot of shots, and that's just kind of his role. But what he does is he's an elite rebounder. He's going to get him on both sides of the ball, and Marquette is not a great rebounding team. So if DR can get you a double-double, he could give you a 3rd straight great fantasy performance here for the NC State Wolfpack. What's interesting is, as good as he's been lately, nobody ever plays him, because the general consensus is this guy's a little bit overpriced. This guy does not take a lot of shots. He's got a very narrow pathway to hitting fantasy points. And so his ownership always ends up being low. And I got to say, I'm kind of digging it. If the ownership ends up being low again, I think he's a pretty solid play because, yeah, that pathway might be narrow, but Marquette isn't going to do anything to push him off of that pathway to reaching fantasy points. So I really do like Mohamed Diarra here in this first game. The rest of the NC State players, O'Connell, Morcell, Taylor, and Middlebrooks are their last 4 rotational players. I think they're all very solid game stacking pieces. Michael O'Connell, the Stanford transfer, is going to play a ton of minutes, and he can have games where he puts up a lot of shots or gets a lot of assists. We know Marquette gives up a really high assist rate. I don't mind going to Michael O'Connell at 5,600. Morcell and Taylor are really boom bust options that I probably don't have a whole lot of interest in. I would rather just go up to O'Connell. Middlebrooks is the guy that would play a ton of minutes if DJ Burns were to be off the floor, like he did it against Texas Tech when he played 23 minutes and put up 35 fantasy points. So if you think, like me, that there's a possibility that DJ Burns does not play a lot of minutes, then Ben Middlebrooks would be your guy at 4,800. So I think if you're using an optimizer, I would probably put a rule in where I want to use either Burns or Middlebrooks. I don't want to use both of them because they're just going to contradict each other here in this game. Now, looking at the Marquette side, the good news for them is that all 5 starters are going to play major minutes as long as they can stay out of foul trouble. That's what they did against Western Kentucky. Cam Jones was in foul trouble against Colorado, but other than that, all of the other starters played massive minutes. And in that situation, Tyler Kolek has absolutely eaten. He had a usage rate of 25% or higher in both NCAA tournament games, and it turned into 47 and 44 fantasy points in both those NCAA tournament games. I think you could even make an argument that he's a little bit underpriced. This is the 2nd best game environment of the night, and he's the guy that makes Marquette's offense go. And I really do like Tyler Kolek here on this slate. He's probably going to be one of my favorite plays at the top of the board. Cam Jones is a little bit scoring dependent, but Marquette's projected to score 78 points. So this is definitely an opportunity where he could get there. He's going to take a ton of shots. Against Colorado, we did mention he dealt with foul trouble. He only played 24 minutes, but he still got up 13 shots. So with Cam Jones, you're going to have plenty of opportunities for him to put up fantasy points. The problem is that I would like to see it be more than just scoring. And since Tyler Kolek has been back in the lineup, his peripheral stats has not been as high as they were when Kolek was out. So I would definitely prefer to play Kolek over Jones, but I'm definitely going to have Jones in my player pool because he can go off at any moment. Now, what's interesting with their bigs is that Joplin has actually had a higher usage rate than Ighodaro in both NCAA tournament games so far, and he's been better from a fantasy perspective in both NCAA tournament games so far. Joplin with 40 and 29, and then Ighodaro with 27 and 22. Now, over the course of the season, Ighodaro has been the better player, right? really over the course of the last 2 seasons. But the good news is with Joplin is that he's just now playing a ton of minutes. He didn't always in the regular season play over 30 minutes. But you look, and since the Big East tournament started, the only game where he played under 34 minutes was the Western Kentucky game where it was a blowout. So in every close game, he has played over 34 minutes recently. And so that does, to me, give David Joplin a ton of upside and reason to think, hey, maybe he can succeed at this price tag because he's getting more minutes than he's used to. So I really do like David Joplin as a play here on this slate as well. And like we mentioned earlier, one of Iguodala or Joplin is going to get the Burns matchup. So I definitely like taking shots at both of them here in this game. But like I said, between the two of them, I'm picking Joplin. Stevie Mitchell is the 5th starter who's going to play a ton of minutes, but he's kind of just a cardio club kind of guy. Against Colorado, he only took 3 shots in 30 minutes. He could be a very solid game stacking piece, and he has gotten there before, but there is a chance where he plays a ton of minutes and just does nothing but run. And then Chase Ross would be your foul trouble guy. When Cam Jones was in foul trouble against Colorado, he was great, 26 fantasy points, but he really needs somebody else to not be playing well for him to play well. Now, heading on to game number 2, we've got Gonzaga taking on Purdue. And this is the highest game total of the night, according to KenPom. KenPom has this one as 81-77 in favor of the Boilermakers. So that makes Purdue the highest team total of the night, and Gonzaga ranking 3rd behind only Purdue and Marquette. Now, on the Gonzaga side, we'll talk about Zach Edey here in just a second, but on the Gonzaga side, they play 3 centers. They play 3 centers a lot of minutes. They don't play them at the same time. I might have worded that poorly. But Gray Mike is their normal center. Ben Gregg is a center who also happens to start at power forward. Another athlete will come off the bench. So between the 3 of them, they have a ton of bodies that they can throw at Zach Edey. They have 15 total fouls that they can throw at Zach Edey between these 3 guys. Now, playing a center going up against Zach Edey has been a fool's errand for the most of the college basketball season. So I don't think I necessarily want to get to EK or Gregg, but Braden Huff sitting down here at $3,900 on DraftKings, he played 18 minutes against Kansas, put up 15 fantasy points. Hey, what if he's needed to play 18 minutes again here against Zach Edey? And what if he's able to just put up, maybe 8.6 boards, something like that, and he gets you 17 fantasy points? I definitely could get behind that, and I think he's a very intriguing value play at $3,900. But like I said, EK and Gregg, even though they do start, even though they've both been good in the NCAA tournament so far, I am just not that interested in playing them, knowing that they're going to be going up against Zach Edey for most of the game. Now, also, from an offensive perspective, the Zags have really ran their offense through Ryan Nembhard and Anton Watson, and I expect that to be the same here in this game. Nembhard has had 9 and 12 assists in 2 NCAA tournament games so far. He hasn't had to do much as a scorer, which has not allowed him to reach value in fantasy, but the scoring potential is there, and the pace of this game is going to be there. So I really do like Ryan Nembhard. I wish he were a little bit cheaper, but I think if I were stacking this game, he would be the number 1 guy on both sides that I'm going to want on my squad. Now, Anton Watson has really been the offensive difference maker for them in the last 2 games. 46 fantasy points against McNeese, 36 fantasy points against Kansas. I don't think Purdue has anybody who can naturally match up with him. He is a matchup problem when they play him at the 3. And so I really do think that this is a good spot for Anton Watson. And at $7,700, I think the price is a little more right than the price on Ryan Nembhard. Nolan Hickman is a game stacking piece, in my opinion. 24 fantasy points against Kansas. That's kind of what he does. He's fairly shot dependent, with Ryan Nembhard getting all the assists and all the bigs that they play, getting all the boards. I'm just not super interested in playing him. Dusty Stromer, I think, is interesting, though. He played really well against McNeese when Gonzaga went small. But here in this one, think about it. Gonzaga's got 3 centers that they're going to throw at Edey. Well, if 2 of them are in foul trouble, then only one of them can be in the game, which would move Anton Watson to the 4, which would mean that another guard would need to play off the bench. And Dusty Stromer would be that guy. That's kind of what you saw against McNeese when he put up 18 fantasy points. So I do think that, considering this is a great game environment and considering that going up against Zach Edey is going to change the Zags' entire strategy for how they play basketball, Huff and Stromer are 2 of my favorite value plays here on the slate. And yeah, I know they're not pretty, they're not sexy, they're not like locks to see 20-plus minutes or 20-plus fantasy points, but I can talk myself into situations situations where they're going to play big minutes and score big fantasy points. And sometimes that's all you need at a guy at a price tag that low. And sometimes that's really all you got. Like, this is a slate that's really deprived of value, and those are two of the better options in my opinion. And I will say also, if I were playing them, I would construct the rest of my lineup around playing them. So like if I'm playing Huff or Stromer, I'm not going after EK, I'm not going after Greg, because those guys would be taking minutes from those two. Now on the Purdue side, got to talk about Zach Edey, right? Best player in college basketball, best player in college basketball DFS, and it's not really even all that close. The NCAA tournament, he's really turned it on. He's been over 56 fantasy points in both NCAA tournament games, and that is pretty incredible. And, he's sitting here at 10,800. That's pretty cheap for Zach Edey. And that's 5x value in both NCAA tournament games at this price tag. We've talked about how Zach Edey generally doesn't win GPPs. Well, guess what? If he's putting up 56 fantasy points and getting 5x value, yeah, he can win you some GPPs. So I definitely do like Zach Edey here on this slate. I really think Gonzaga is going to try to defend him with their three centers and not necessarily double him or anything like that. So I think there should be plenty of opportunity for Zach Edey to have another big game here in this one. What's real interesting, though, is that after Edey, the next best player for Purdue in the NCAA tournament has been Trey Kaufman-Renn. 21 fantasy points against Grambling, 38 against Utah State, and he's still only $4,400 on DraftKings. He's had over a 27% usage rate in both of those games. This is a straight-up misprice, especially considering that Gonzaga is going to play with multiple bigs, and he's probably going to play at the four more than Mason Gillis because he's going to be needed to guard those bigs. And so I really do like Trey Kaufman-Renn here in this one. I think he's going to be a supremely popular value play. Do I think you can play him with Zach Edey? Yes. Do I think you can play him without Zach Edey? Also, yes. At $4,400, all he needs to do is what he's done in the last two, and he's going to give you big time value. But like I said, I expect him to be a supremely popular value play here on this slate. Now, with Gonzaga being a pace-up game for Purdue, I think that kind of makes a little bit of a recipe for one of the other guys, Braden Smith, Lance Jones, or Fletcher Lawyer, to go off. We haven't really seen it in a while, but all it takes is one of them getting hot from behind the arc, or in Braden Smith's case, getting a ton of peripheral stats to end up putting up a lot of fantasy points. And so with Jones and Lawyer, if you do get a game where they get hot from behind the arc, they're instantly going to pay for their salary, and I do think that they make for intriguing value options here on this slate as well. All right, so let's go ahead. That ends it for game number 2. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we are going to talk about games 3 and 4, the late night cap. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I did mention earlier that is a place where I am going to be posting updates if I do, in fact, end up going live. Any updates for the show you can find on there. And then also, I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you just reach out to me there on Twitter. Now, also join the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. The Fantasy Corner Discord has a lot of smart people who play a lot of DFS for a lot of different sports, and the discussion in there is always great. We're always talking lineups, talking strategy, talking plays, and then sweating out together after it starts. And it's just a blast to be a part of, and a great community that always supports each other. And we've had a lot of guys win a lot of money in the college basketball channel here this season, and baseball season is starting. And we have a lot of guys in there who are really good at baseball DFS. So join there if you're interested in playing college basketball, MLB, golf, NBA DFS. Got a lot of smart people and a great community to be part of. If you want my advice on any slate, like for college basketball, I'm more than happy to share and more than happy to talk in there. There's some extra stats and nuggets sometimes that I find after researching and doing these shows that I put in there. And so it's just a great community to be a part of, and I cannot recommend enough if you want more people to talk about DFS with. Also, I do write a full article for my Patreon every college basketball DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as my lineup strategy and attack strategy for each slate. There's not a whole lot of people doing this for college basketball right now. And I can't just sit here and promise that you're instantly going to be able to play them and win GPPs. It's not that easy, but I do think that you can get some very sound advice from somebody who is experienced in this sport, and there's not a whole lot of people out there who are. And then you can also use that to help build your own process and your own strategy and get better at college basketball DFS. All right, so now let's go ahead and dive into the last 2 games tonight. And y'all, I swear, when I was younger, these games didn't start this late. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't feel like they were starting at 10 o'clock at night. Anyway, I'm not a fan as somebody who's on the East Coast and somebody who has a 7-month-old daughter. Anyway, next game up is Duke taking on Houston. So KenPom has this one with the lowest projected total of the night at 135, with a projected Houston victory of 69-66. Now, the good news is that both these teams are not going to play a whole lot of guys. So even though there's only projected to be 135 points scored, it's definitely less mouths to feed in terms of who is scoring them. For Duke, if they play a close game, they might be content to just play 5 guys if all their guys can stay out of foul trouble. In the first game against Vermont, they only had 16 combined bench minutes. And really, I just don't see a scenario, unless somebody's in foul trouble, of any of the bench guys, Stewart, Young, Foster, or Blakes. I don't see a scenario where any of them play big-time minutes unless somebody gets in foul trouble or unless somebody is injured. Like, for instance, Jeremy Roach currently has a Q tag, but I strongly expect him to play in this game. I'm not concerned about that, but that's definitely a possibility. That would be one of the situations where one of the bench options for Duke would play a lot of minutes. But other than that, they're content to just play their 5 starters. Kyle Filipowski is one of those guys who does need to stay out of foul trouble. In that game against James Madison, he did get caught in foul trouble, only played 21 minutes. And then against Vermont, he had really weird usage and only took 1 shot. It still put up 33 fantasy points. But that's the cool thing about Kyle Filipowski, y'all, is these last 2 games, he's had a game where he only took 1 shot and a game where he was in foul trouble and played half the minutes that he normally does. And he still put up 30 fantasy points in both games. He showed his incredibly high floor in that game, and I think even with a perceived tough matchup against Houston, I still think he's a solid cash game play because of the fact that it really can't get much worse than either of those 2 games, and he was still able to put up 30 fantasy points in both of those instances. Now, after that, it's really tough to predict which of Duke's big 3 guards, McCain, Roach, and Proctor, is going to go off. The good news is, though, is that if you just played all of them in the NCAA tournament so far, they have combined for 5 4x value games out of a possible 6 in the NCAA tournament so far. The only one who didn't hit was Tyrese Proctor against Vermont. He only had 19.5 fantasy points. He was the only Duke big 3 guard who didn't hit 4x value in both games so far in the postseason. So I do think that you can absolutely play McCain, Roach, and Proctor, and trying to figure out which one that's going to go off is pretty tough. But hey, they're all guaranteed touches. They're all guaranteed shots. And I know it's a tough matchup against Houston, but I definitely do want to take shots at these guys because you never know who's going to end up going off, like how Jared McCain did against James Madison, where he put up 43 fantasy points on 10 for 15 shooting. What's interesting is that he was just so efficient in that game that Tyrese Proctor actually led the team in usage. He was 7 for 15 from the field and only put up 30 fantasy points. But McCain was so efficient that he was able to put up 40 on a slightly lower usage rate. Now, after that, we mentioned this already, but Stewart, Young, Power, and Blakes would be the guys who would play if somebody does end up getting in foul trouble here for Duke. But I don't know. I don't really want to chase that in particular unless I'm playing GPPs and I'm just looking for a value play to take shots at. Mark Mitchell is an interesting play. He doesn't take a lot of shots for this Duke team. Hasn't been great in the 2 NCAA tournament games so far, but he's only $6,000, and he's going to be needed to have some muscle and get some boards against this Houston team. So I could see Mark Mitchell having a great game. He's probably not going to be very highly owned, but I don't know. It's just a purely unsexy play here for Duke against Houston. Now, for Houston, we know where their usage is going to go. It's going to be their big 3 guards. They're kind of like with Duke, right? Except they don't have a Kyle Filipowski down low. Their big 3 guards are Jamal Shedd, LJ Cryer, and Emmanuel Sharp. The 3 of them all had over a 26% usage rate against Texas A&M, and they all 3 were over a 22% usage rate against Longwood. I think the price tag on Jamal Shedd is really affordable. He's got a really high assist rate. He can also get you some rebounds as a guard, and he's sitting here at $7,500 where he only needs 30 fantasy points to hit 4x value. And excluding the Longwood blowout, excluding the Iowa State blowout, he has done that in each of the last 10 games, 11 games. Yeah. So, if this game stays close, it's very likely that he's going to hit you 4x value. I think he's just a really solid play. He can have ceiling games where he takes north of 15 shots. So I really do like Jamal Shedd. And I actually really like the concept of stacking him with LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp. They are both shooters who primarily play on the wing, but with such a high assist rate as Shedd has, if these guys are going to be hitting their 3s on the wing, then Shedd's going to be getting a lot of assists. And you kind of see that in the Texas A&M game. LJ Cryer was 3 3 for 10 from 3. The fact that he got 10 threes is pretty impressive. And he put up 34 fantasy points in a game where he fouled out. And then Emmanuel Sharp, 7 for 14 from 3, put up 44 fantasy points in a game where he also fouled out. So definitely like the concept of stacking Shed with either Cryer or Sharp here in this one, and hoping that one of them gets hot from behind the arc and Shed is the one dishing out the assists. I really do like Juwan Roberts also. I really do think you can attack Duke from the center position. I don't think Kyle Filipowski is an elite defender, and Roberts put up 32 fantasy points in 33 minutes against Texas A&M. He's finally back healthy from injury, and I do think that gives him a ton of upside at a very reasonable salary that is kind of not taken for account the fact that he's been injured prior to last game. So definitely do like the idea of Roberts at 5,700. I think a sneaky little Houston stack of Shed and Roberts or Shed Cryer / Sharp and Roberts could be in a way that you could put up a lot of fantasy points here on this one if this game does in fact end up hitting over. Now, Javier Francis normally plays the 5 for Houston, but he's been dealing with foul trouble and he hasn't played a lot of minutes at the 5, so maybe he could be a guy who could take advantage of that matchup as well. But what's interesting is when he does get in foul trouble, they don't play another big. They move Roberts to the 5 and they play Wilson and Dunn as like a small ball lineup where they move Sharp to the 4. And both those two guys have been decent in limited minutes. Dunn played 19 minutes against A&M, 23 against Longwood. And then Malik Wilson has been playing more than that, though. Played 23 against Longwood, 25 against Texas A&M. So I do think those two as bench options for Houston are definitely on the board, but kind of more GPP plays because they're not really like a whole lot of safety there. Now, the last game of the night, which is tipping off at pretty much 10 o'clock Eastern time, is Creighton versus Tennessee, which is crazy because this game's in Detroit. And why are you making people go to a game at 10? I don't know. I don't get it. Anyway, this game, KenPom has projected to be 73-71 in favor of Tennessee. This is the closest game on the day, according to KenPom, and this is the third highest total of the day, according to KenPom. And I kind of get it. Both these teams play a lot of close games anyway, and they're about equal levels, so why would they not end up playing a close game? I would be supremely shocked if this game ends up turning into a blowout. On the Creighton side, they have a big 4. We've talked about it all season long. Who's going to play all of the minutes? Shireman, Kalkbrenner, Alexander, and Ashworth, and then the 5th guy on the floor is just going to be a guy who stands in the corner. Basically, Kalkbrenner has been their best option in DFS in the NCAA tournament so far. He put up 39 fantasy points against Akron, 53 fantasy points against Oregon, was great in both those games, efficient from the floor, getting a lot of rebounds, getting a lot of block shots as well. To me, the big thing with him has been his rebounding has picked up in the postseason. 12, 8, and 14 rebounds in the last 3 postseason games. And in the 3 games before the postseason, he had not hit above 8. So the fact that he's back to rebounding is big. What it's also doing is, we kind of talked about this during the season. He was kind of like the box out king in the regular season, where he would box out and kind of like, oh, where's Baylor at? All right, Baylor, you can have that one. But now that it's in the postseason, now he is attacking the glass and he's getting a lot more rebounds, and it's increasing his fantasy stock and it's decreasing the fantasy stock of Baylor Shireman, with him still getting a decent amount of rebounds, but just the overall volume hasn't been there for Shireman here, and it's going to be pretty tough for him to hit value at a salary of $9,000. So I do like the idea of Kalkbrenner over Shireman if you're looking to pay up for one of those two. But Alexander, I do think, is an option at 7,900. Had 38 fantasy points against against Oregon, led them in usage in that game, put up 27 and 5. He's a guy who can absolutely fill up the stat sheet, and he's going to play all of the minutes. So I definitely don't mind going with any of those Creighton Big 3, although be advised, Tennessee is not exactly a great matchup for stars. As we saw with the Texas game, both Asmus and Dessou kind of struggled to hit value a little bit. Buyer beware a little bit. I would probably rather go with some other guys than them. But hey, if I'm playing 20 max lineups, I'm definitely going to be taking my shots at those guys. Stephen Ashworth, I think, is a little bit underpriced, believe it or not. He put up 36 fantasy points against Oregon on 5 for 15 from 3. Look, if you're telling me he's going to take 15 threes again, I'm going to jam him in my lineup every time, because he's probably going to make 5 or 6 of them, and that's 15 points right there. He's going to play 40 or 35 plus minutes. So there's, a ton of opportunities to put up rebounds and assists as well. So I really do think Ashworth's a little bit of a misprice, and I think I might be more on board with playing him than any of the big 3. Now, as for the rest of Creighton's lineup, like Miller and Farabello are going to be a part of the rotation. Like they are what they are. They kind of stand in a corner and watch most of the game. But Jason Green played 18 minutes against Oregon, put up 14 fantasy points, 4 points, 9 boards. It's not bad. He's $3,100. And, he's kind of had these pop games over the course of the season. Had 15 fantasy points against UConn, had 11 fantasy points against Georgetown. And I know you're sitting there thinking, yeah, Mike, that's not a lot at all. Well, he's only $3,100 on DraftKings. So he only needs 12 fantasy points to give you value. And, what? Who's to say that he won't come in and do that again? Because the fifth spot for this Creighton lineup has been such a revolving door where Miller and Farabello haven't really given them a whole lot. And so why not give it to Jason Green and see what he can do? I definitely think there's a chance that they do that. Also, what's interesting to note as we transition on over to talk about Tennessee, the big question with Tennessee always is, how are you going to guard Dalton Knecht? He's their best offensive player. He's one of the best offensive players in the nation. Well, the way Texas did it, Texas kind of did a little matchup zone where it was not necessarily one guy that was locking him down. And so they were constantly switching up who was guarding him. They were switching everything on screens, and they didn't really try to lock him down with one guy. And it was pretty effective. I don't think Creighton is going to do that. Creighton is a team that when they defend screens, they like Ryan Kalkbrenner being at the rim because he's a shot blocker, right? And so they run a lot of drop coverage off of screen and roll. And if you watch the Oregon game, Jermaine Couisnard was just going off against that drop coverage. He was getting pull-up threes, pull-up mid-ranges whenever he wanted. And so if Tennessee does that a lot with Dalton Knecht here in this game, and he's able to get his open threes and mid-ranges, he could be a long night for Creighton. And at $8,200, it's asking a little bit of Knecht to hit value, but is it really? This is a guy who can absolutely fill up the stat sheet in a hurry. And in the Texas game where he was 5 for 18 from the field, he was still able to put up about 30 fantasy points. So definitely a very high floor for Dalton Knecht. And if Creighton does do what they've done all season and play drop coverage, then I think that's a recipe for Dalton Knecht to put up a ton of points here in this one. Now, Ziegler, Adu, James, and Vescovi are the rest of the starting lineup for Tennessee. And if you really go back and look at all of their game logs, they're kind of dependent on one of two things happening to have big performances. They're dependent on Knecht struggling and not getting a lot of shots off, or they're dependent on a big-time pace-up game where Tennessee is scoring north of 80 points. And so ask yourself, is that likely to happen here in this game against Creighton? Is it likely that Knecht struggles, or is it likely that this game ends up shooting out and we're seeing 80-plus points scored? I don't think either of those two things are likely from everything I have seen. Now, that's just me. You might see it differently, but that's just me. And so I'm not very likely to play Ziegler, Adu, James, or Vescovi in that situation. Ziegler is a guy who can put up a bunch of peripheral stats in a hurry. He was objectively awful shooting the ball against Texas, but still put up 26 fantasy points because he did do so much with the peripheral stats. Adu, dealt with, I don't want to say foul trouble, but it didn't feel like watching the Texas game he was out there for 32 minutes. Like he kind of seemed like he was in and out of the lineup and still put up 25 fantasy points. And, he was a non-factor for a large part of that game. So definitely two guys with decent floors, but is it very likely that they're going to hit their ceiling? I really don't think so. Now, for their bench options, Awaka came in and played 11 minutes against Texas and was just an animal when he was in there. Now, the problem is he picked up 4 fouls when he was in there. But if he's able to come in and stay out of foul trouble, he is a very strong guy who's very aggressive. And because of the limited minutes he plays very hard. And when he's out there, he has a very high usage rate. So I do think that at $4,100, I could make a compelling argument that Awaka is a decent value play. And then also, if you see this situation happen, Santiago Vescovi is apparently sick right now, dealing with some kind of virus or whatever. If he is sick and he's not able to play full minutes, then you're probably going to see more minutes from Jordan Gainey. I would think he would be the beneficiary of those minutes. He's a guy that doesn't come with a supremely high usage rate, but when he was at USC Upstate last year, he was a very high usage player, very good scorer. So I could, again, make a compelling argument where there's a situation where he ends up putting up a lot of fantasy points. Jemai Meshack could also be a beneficiary of those minutes. But from what I've seen of Tennessee, and I did just watch them unfortunately beat Texas last week, from what I have seen from Tennessee, I would think it would be more likely that Gainey would be the guy that would take advantage of those minutes. But if I am being honest, when it comes to this Tennessee team, it's probably mostly Dalton Knecht for me in my lineups. All right, so that does it for the 4 games for the Friday, March 29th Sweet 16 DFS slate. Hopefully I was able to give you guys plenty of good information that's going to help you guys build winning lineups here on this Friday slate. If you like what you saw in the YouTube video, please, please, please hit the like button. It really does help me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. And if you're listening on audio, please rate and review. I promise those do not fall on deaf ears. They help the podcast show up in searches. And right now, if you search College Basketball DFS on Spotify, we're the first podcast that shows up, and that's because people like you go in and rate and review. So if you want to show me some support, if I've helped you out any over the course of the season, please show me some support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, rate and review. I really do appreciate it. You guys are the best. All right, so reminder, I may or may not be going live tomorrow night. I will be sure to tweet out an update. I'll also be sure to have the schedule posted on YouTube if I am going live. So make sure you are following me on there to know that. But if not, there will still be an episode for the Elite Eight slate. But just with my daughter's sleeping situation, I just don't know if I'm going to go live or not. We are trying to crib train her right now, and we are trying to let her cry it out. So some nights that's a little bit more successful than others. If you've been there, you probably know what I'm talking about. So we'll just see how it goes, and I might end up going live, I might not. But either way, I do promise there will be an episode. So if you're subscribed on YouTube, you'll know when that episode drops. If not, it is live. All right, so that does it for this episode, guys. Like I said, hopefully I was able to give you guys all the information you need to build lineups tomorrow. Best of luck to you guys on the DFS slates tomorrow. Best of luck to you if your bracket is still not busted. Best of luck to you if you're still live in survivor pools, or if you're betting on these games. Whatever, March Madness is a great time of year to play all kinds of different games, but we had the DFS portion covered here on this show. Best of luck to you guys tomorrow, and I will see you guys next time.